We begin with the war in Ukraine. President Volodymyr Zelenskyy is accusing Russia of creating a humanitarian catastrophe by blocking critical supplies to his country's largest cities. Ukraine's defense minister says Russian troops are blocking access to the Azov Sea, which connects to the Black Sea. Officials say Russian troops are closing in on Mariupol's city center. The city has seen some of the fiercest fighting since the invasion began, leaving hundreds of thousands of civilians trapped without food, water, heat, or electricity. And in the western part of Ukraine, fighting is intensifying around Lviv. The city sits just 40 miles from Poland, which is a member of NATO. Meanwhile, U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin repeated the White House's condemnation of Russia's offensive. Secretary Austin traveled to Bulgaria to meet with the nation's prime minister Saturday. While there, he also reassured Western leaders that the White House is committed to NATO and its united response against Russia. CBS News foreign correspondent Imtiaz Tyab joins us now with more from Lviv, Ukraine. Imtiaz, fighting has intensified in many cities there in Ukraine. What cities are being the hardest hit? And I'm wondering if you can tell us, have you seen the mood shifting there in Lviv?
Hey, Lana, good to talk to you. Look, it's pretty clear that Vladimir Putin's war of attrition, as the British government is now calling it, is only getting worse. Many areas have seen fighting intensify. We've seen Russian shelling and Russian missile attacks. And we've seen Russian weaponry sort of target areas in ways that we haven't seen before. But all eyes really at this moment is on the seaport of Mariupol, which you mentioned in your introduction. This is a very strategic city, and it has just been bombarded with an intensity that really beggars belief over the past several weeks, and more importantly, over the past 72 hours or so. The scenes out of Mariupol are frankly horrifying. Buildings just reduced to complete rubble, and people are just in such a dire strait. I mean, we've been hearing reports of many streets being essentially littered with bodies. That is just how grim the situation there is in Mariupol. But of course, fighting also rages on elsewhere on the outskirts of Kyiv. We've seen a lot of fighting, and in Kharkiv as well, that eastern city, which is, again, very similar to Mariupol, just in ruins because of Russia's bombardment. And yet still, all of those areas are still standing. All of those areas are standing in the sense that those Ukrainian forces are there, that Russia hasn't seized these areas. And so that fight, although they're being hammered, they are standing strong. Lana.
We're also hearing reports, Imtiaz, that Russia used hypersonic missiles at an arms depot. What more can you tell us about that?
Yeah, a hypersonic missile known as the Dagger. And it really is just that. It is this extraordinary piece of weaponry that a Russian general has confirmed its use of today. They said that they were targeting an underground weapons cache. And it is such a powerful weapon that when it hits its target, nobody knows it's coming because it's moving so quickly. And when I was speaking to one of our security advisors on what it actually does once it hits its target, the building itself, the way he described it, essentially folds in on itself, essentially flattening it. And that is a new worrying specter that has been inserted into this already horrific conflict, that if we see more of these weapons being used, it's only going to cause even more destruction on top of the horrors that we've seen elsewhere. Lana.
Well, Imtiaz, President Zelenskyy is making an appeal now to Russia for meaningful talks. Is that on track? Have they been making any headway?
We've seen round after round after round after round of talks between Russians and Ukrainians. Very early on, it was in person. A lot of it is now being done remotely. But Volodymyr Zelenskyy, the president of Ukraine, saying he wants to now meet with Russian President Vladimir Putin in person, face to face, meaningful talks. Let's come up with something that can end this violence. Mr. Zelenskyy has made it clear he doesn't want to be president of a country that is completely in ruins. He wants an end to this conflict. And that's why those talks are so vital and so important. So again, Vladimir Zelenskyy making it very clear to Vladimir Putin he's ready to talk. Lana.
Imtiaz, you have done some incredible reporting, in particular about families and the children who have been sent there to Lviv, sent out of harm's way in what is an incredible choice because families aren't actually able to stay together. Can you tell us more about what you're seeing there in Lviv?
Yeah, Lana, look, unfortunately, I've covered quite a few conflicts in my career in many parts of the world. And the one thing I know for sure is that it's really children who suffer the most. Not only do they witness violence, not only do they experience violence, they also lose their childhoods. They lose their innocence. And yesterday, we met a group of children, 42 children, from a place called Volodymyr. Now, Volodymyr is probably not a place that many people watching has ever heard of. It's a town of around 22,000 people, and it's been all but obliterated by Russian forces, all but obliterated. And these kids who we met were essentially living under siege for 2 weeks, under that intense Russian bombardment, under that intense Russian shelling, which saw the only home they knew destroyed. And they're here in Lviv now. They're staying in a safe place. They're staying at a hostel. There's a lot of volunteers there. You know, they have warm beds, warm clothes, toys to play with, hot meals to eat. They're very well cared for. But these children didn't come to Lviv with their parents. Their parents are still in Volodymyr, and their parents had to make the agonizing decision to send their children on a 600-mile journey from their town to here, the west of the country, which has largely been spared any kind of violence. And it took these kids 72 hours, 3 full days of traveling to get here. And again, I do want to stress that they are cared for and they're being taken care of. But I was sitting with some of the kids and they were smiling, and they're kids. Kids in the worst of times will always be children, and they will smile and they'll laugh. And we were sort of putting together a puzzle, me and a boy and a girl. And I asked the boy, are you happy here? And his face changed and it became very serious. And he said no. He just wanted to be home with his family. And that is the reality for so many children who have either been separated from their parents or with their parents, but have had to flee their homes. We now know over 3 million Ukrainians have had to flee this country because of the violence. 1.5 million of those are children. And so as this brutal war rages on, it really is the children who are suffering the absolute worst. Lana.
I cannot imagine the decision that those parents had to make in separating themselves in that chaos from the people that they love the most in the world. Thank you so much, Imtiaz.